Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I mean, I can only imagine the kind of insights that you could gather from doing, whether it's automated inspections or even human-based inspections, but then you have all this unstructured data. You don't really know, like you can't really analyze it to such a deep extent with humans and then gain a lot of insight from it. You kind of need some of these autonomous tools or AI tools in order to gather some deeper insights that would then help your business.
Well, I think it's, you have to kind of take it to a point of, I mean, you could call it structuring of data. Like, how do I identify the cracks in a bridge or things like that? And so it's like just staring at photos of bridges, like a year of the same photo over 10 years, our eyes aren't going to catch it. But if you can run computer vision on it, identify highlights, and then compare that, that's that augmentation part you're talking about.
We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
Hi there, everybody. This is Mark Verbenkov, and welcome back to the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. This is episode number 160, and we are going to be focusing on a little bit of a different aspect of artificial intelligence today, namely the data that underlies how artificial intelligence capabilities are coming about. So we have on Kirk Marple. He is the founder and CEO of Graphlit, which is an end-to-end API that streamlines the development of vertical AI apps by ingesting unstructured data, which is going to be a big part of today's discussion, and leverages retrieval-augmented generation to improve accuracy, domain, specificity, adaptability, and context understanding, all while expediting development. He's also a serial entrepreneur with an established history leading technical teams at companies including Microsoft and General Motors. I think it's an interesting discussion for those of you that might not fully understand how artificial intelligence is built or how it is trained. So we don't get into too many technical discussions, but we do kind of look at a more fundamental aspect of AI, namely the data. We get into something called knowledge graphs, which I'll let Kirk explain much better than myself. So it's an interesting discussion because it also then moves on beyond the kind of the foundation and artificial intelligence, but then also to the apps and the tools that can be built with either AI or generative AI, and specifically how all of this unstructured and therefore structured data is essential to enabling these kinds of tools that we're all using today. So I guess you could say it's a little bit more of a foundational discussion on how relevant artificial intelligence is. And I think it's interesting, certainly educational for myself, where I come from a far less technical background. And I hope that all of you get a little bit of benefit from the discussion as well. Thanks for listening.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kirk, for coming onto the podcast today to talk to us about unstructured data, AI, and I hope a number of other points that are going to be interesting for the audience. So yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. The opportunity is great.
Yeah. So as I mentioned before the recording, I kind of like to start off the podcast with like the motivation or the inspiration that my guest had for getting into the work that you're doing, rather than just, rambling off the companies that you've worked for and education that you've had. So if you can start us off with like what inspired you to get into the work that you're doing now, I think that'll kind of lay the foundation for what we'll be talking on today.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I kind of have been in the media software space my whole career. I always say is, everything from image processing to video transcoding to different things. And it was always about the media being for our eyeballs. It was always for consumers. And I had a company for a dozen years in that space and started to get interested in the knowledge embedded in that data after I'd sold that company. And so it was actually a podcast idea that I had where it was listening to podcasts, you kind of miss so much, like if you're in the car, and how do you kind of navigate all the the people and the Tombe, things like that. And it got me interested in knowledge graphs. And so just all the interconnected knowledge that's embedded in the media. And that was really the first originating point. And then that kind of drew me into building a platform and seeing there just wasn't tooling for that. And the world's changed the last 18 months with LLMs and these models that with AI, and it just kind of built on that whole kind of original concept I thought of.
Right. Well, maybe a perfect place to start off then is with a couple definitions, right? Short, but I think essential for a conversation. So if you can tell us what unstructured data is, and knowledge graphs, of course, which will be a large focus of today.
Yeah, I mean, unstructured data, I typically, I mean, you could think of media, I mean, images, video, anything in that domain as being unstructured data. And that's a common case, but it's also documents, web pages, anything that's in a file that isn't in a tabular form. So I always say that anything that doesn't look like a spreadsheet is pretty much, I mean, at least my definition of unstructured data. And there's not just one, but I think that's a general concept to get it close. And then knowledge graphs are really, I mean, if you think of Google, I mean, how they've developed this, I mean, when you do a Google search, you're essentially walking their knowledge graph of data. I always just think of it as, I mean, there's entities, the nodes that are in the graph that are the people, the places, the things. And there's the relationships. It's, I work for Graphlit. I used to work for Microsoft. I live in Seattle. Like, you can think of those as just being like kind of dots and lines in the graph. And that's the most simplistic way I always think of it.
Yeah, when I first researched a little bit, like what one of these graphs is, it sounds more like a network or a node or a web or something like that. So I think that term might throw people off.
Yeah, I mean, people used to, the semantic web was something people talked about probably, 10, 20 years ago. And I mean, it's so similar, honestly, to what we're doing today. I mean, with these building knowledge graphs and hyper-connected data and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so how does this, and maybe this is a question that I should ask in a couple questions, but this is what I want to dive into. It's, how does this connect to LLMs and artificial intelligence? Like, why are we talking about this today if we're talking about emerging technologies and AI?
Yeah, I mean, the ability to create knowledge graphs has been around for a while. I mean, so there's something called NER, named entity recognition, of identifying the people, the places, and the things. And typically it's just terms, but they're not, typically they hadn't gotten a lot of metadata around it. Like, it couldn't pull, I mean, if it saw Seattle, it wouldn't flush out that to Seattle, Washington, USA. Like, it wouldn't have the context for it. And what LLMs are really good at is providing that context via their training. And so when you're pulling out this information, it, like, I just had to deal with something this week where it referenced LeBron James and the Lakers. And the model knew that it was really the Los Angeles Lakers was the entity that it needed to pull out. And so with a little prompting, I can say, hey, like, if you know of the full name of something, return me that. And that just wasn't possible. I mean, 5, 10, 15 years ago. And so I think even to take a step back, I mean, to build the graph, you have to look at text and find these entities, these terms. We'd been doing that years ago. Other companies have been doing it years ago. But the phase shift that happened about 18 months ago was LLMs and AI in general now give you capabilities that just weren't there before, to make a more robust graph, I would say. And that's one half of it. The other half is how you can then sort of have a chat experience and use the data in the graph. And that's something now that we're talking about is called graph RAG, or retrieval-augmented generation with the graph. And we can dive into that more if you want.
Yeah, sure. Why don't we? Because I think this is a point that was brought up in some of the notes that we exchanged beforehand.
Yeah. I mean, if people are familiar, I mean, RAG essentially is you're doing a search on your unstructured data. You're finding what seems relevant based on the question you're asking. And then you can take that information, format it for the LLM, and then it gives you back a response based on the prompt. So you're kind of giving it its brain. Like, that's the way LLMs work, is you have to hand it the memory that you want them to answer on for the most part. Otherwise they do what, I mean, everybody talks about is hallucination. Yeah. And so kind of just guessing at it based on their training. And what graph RAG does is you get the text of what's relevant to the prompt, but you also get the subgraph. And so you can kind of like pull on the data and figure out all the, like the web you said before, pull on that and get that information back. And that's where it becomes really powerful. And so it can give back more context to your answers because it actually can know things that aren't in the text. And that's really where it becomes interesting, where if you have a knowledge graph and it says Microsoft, you can enrich that data with the revenue, it's in Redmond, how many employees there are, that wouldn't be in that PDF that you're asking about. And that data can be held in the graph. And so that's really where we, it's a data, you just look at it as it's a data model that you can use to provide more context to the LLM.
Okay, maybe I want to take a step back here so that it's a little bit more clear in my mind. And if I'm having questions, I'm sure some audience members are as well. So we're talking about knowledge graphs and unstructured data. You mentioned like media, text, image, etc. You also mentioned like a PDF. So could unstructured data be just a simple PDF, and the knowledge graph is based off of that one PDF? Now, I'm assuming, it could be one page, but it's probably going to be 100 pages or 1,000 pages or something like that to make an actual graph.
100%. And we look at it like canonicalizing all data. So we try and map it all to the same internal data format. If it's PDF, it's still web page, doesn't matter how long it is. And so the first step of the workflow we call preparation. And so you're taking the raw source. If it's audio, we do a transcription of it. If it's an image, we ask for a description with a vision model. If it's PDF, we rip out all the text. And so you have to start by getting it into a form that you can use it. And that's the first step. And then you can run the extraction into the knowledge graph on whatever the results of that first step are. And so for us, we're agnostic to whatever kind of data you give us, because at some point in the middle, it's just text. It's essentially structured by page or by section. It's something that we know how to deal with in a common way.
Okay. Okay. I have a couple more questions, but I think we need to also talk about the tangible relevance of all this before, so that people understand, like, okay, well, what is the value of this? Why are we talking about this today? So I don't know if you want to introduce your company here, or talk about just why are these graphs being created? Why are knowledge graphs being created? And then what tangible connection is there to the real world with these?
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a great segue. I think, so my company, Graphlit, we build a developer platform. So we help developers build this technology into their vertical applications. And so I was trying to build a lot of these kind of things at other companies and realized there just isn't something off the shelf. At least 5 years ago that you could use. There wasn't a Snowflake, or there wasn't a Fivetran for like database structured data for unstructured data. And so I started building this kind of platform, and really the value is, number one, you need help just getting the data flowing. How do you pull from Slack? How do you pull from email? How do you pull from Notion? Scrape the web. And then building the knowledge graph isn't, I wouldn't say it's not trivial, but it's also, you can have sort of layers of complication of what if you get duplicates? How do you make sure that you're merging similar things together? The LLMs aren't perfect. How do you prompt against it correctly to generate the right data? And that's where I think that you need a platform, or somebody needs to write a bunch of code to help that part of it. And then the GraphRag part of it is when you build an application on this, you have to have something, probably in the cloud that you're querying against that can fulfill these requirements. And so from a value proposition, what we've seen is when companies have unstructured data that references other context, like they're asking about some products and that product information is exported from a database, like pulling those pieces together, and it works best across multiple pieces of content. So it's not, GraphRag's probably not something like for one 20-page PDF that you might see a difference, but it's, if you're asking a question across web content, audio transcripts, Slack messages, email, you're going to benefit because it's a better web per se, like you're saying. But yeah, I'm happy to dive in anywhere you want.
Yeah, maybe just to so okay, we're obviously talking about apps that are being developed by developers, and I think that some of these are now going to be AI apps, right? It's not just like apps that you have on your cell phone, for instance. Could you, again, to make it a little bit more tangible, and maybe I'm incorrect here, but could you maybe give us a couple examples of some of these tools or apps or softwares that people are building?
I mean, I think one looks like ChatGPT. I mean, I think a common use case of, I mean, AI co-pilots or things like that, where essentially you're just ingesting a whole bunch of data, maybe in the background, like you're continually ingesting your Slack messages and things. And then the end user is asking questions about it. That's one use case. Another is kind of summarization, almost like Google Alerts, if you've used that, where I have a whole bunch of data in the background. I want to summarize it and tell me when a topic pops up or when a company was mentioned. And so that's a good use case when we've identified something in data that you want to be alerted on. But another is really, I mean, just a deeper capability to kind of generate content of kind of new reports, new blog posts for marketing. We have folks in like the healthcare space that are ingesting a bunch of data about, I mean, patient data, drug data, treatment data. And by identifying these terms like of a medicine or patient details or whatever it is, as an entity, not just a piece of text, is really the value. And that lets us give a lot more complete responses to the questions that they're asking. And so for us, we don't really care about the vertical. I mean, we're talking to people in, I mean, the construction space, in the healthcare space, in the fintech space or wherever, and we're just providing a common platform. And so their apps, we always say, are vertical, where they're going to target a niche of customers. But for us, we're just kind of generic for who we target any developer per se.
Right. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I think the like healthcare example is pretty interesting. You could kind of imagine where there might be some insights that, say, a hospital might need to know in order to make their, how should I say this, treatments of patients throughout the whole hospital, like throughout the whole system, improved, but they don't even understand that those things are going to be existing unless they throw some of these AI tools at it. And I guess Graphlit would help them understand the connections within this graph, as you were saying, the connections between things that they might not have seen before.
Because, I mean, really, I think maybe a better comparison is to understand, okay, just normal RAG, as we call it, the retrieval side of it, it's purely just going by text similarity. And in cases where things look the same, like a product SKU, I mean, of like 1, 2, 3, 4, it looks kind of similar to 1, 2, 3, 5, but they're completely different things. And that's really where this adds value, is if those are separate entities, like up to product entities that happen to have different identifiers, SKU identifiers, but then there's a product description, there's a price, there's maybe a web page that goes with it. That's really where the differentiation comes in, because that's where RAG falls down a lot, is if there's unique things that you're finding, it's useful. But if there's a lot of similarity and maybe a lot of patterns that just seem to be repeated, it can't really differentiate. I mean, just like a human couldn't. If you're reading a 50-page doc and every chapter looks pretty much the same, except for one paragraph being different, you're going to have a hard time identifying which, like, the data to pull in for your answer.
And have you seen in some of these, we could just stick with the healthcare example, have you seen, or maybe I should just ask, what kind of benefits have you actually seen? Like, have there been like tremendous efficiency gains, or just like better understanding of how like a hospital works, or like what are some of the things, again, to make it a little bit more tangible for myself and for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, we're still a bit on the early side, so we're just getting started with some of these companies that have some of these more robust use cases. But I mean, I think they see the value because they understand their vertical better, and so they've seen what they've tried before. And the alternate was just named entities. I mean, hey, these are terms, and they're trying to map those, but now using LLMs to be able to then summarize that data, be able to extract that data properly, they're very encouraged by the results they can get. And I mean, we have some demo apps and things that they've tried out, and we can show, okay, here's a small set of data, try asking questions. You can see A/B test. But I think we'll know more over the next 6, 9, 12 months of, okay, as these workflows get integrated into their daily work, how some of this will come out.
This is something that I'm also experiencing in my own life here. I mean, I use ChatGPT like I guess many modern day professionals multiple times a day, but I'm still interacting like many of my clients, for instance, don't, right? Like they either see it a couple times and they're scared of it, or they're a little bit older. It's like, I've been doing something, for the past 20 years. I don't need to change anything. How do I phrase this question? How essential is it that people can now chat with the data for adoption of, say, your tool, your platform? Is it because it's natural? It's a natural language. Is that enabling like more people in the enterprise to, work with this platform?
Yeah, I mean, the way I typically describe it is, ChatGPT was this kind of game-changing experience where it kind of clicked for a lot of people. I mean, we've been out there talking about unstructured data for a couple of years before that, of the power of cataloging the data and retrieving the data. And I think then the ChatGPT experience where people are like, okay, now I could see what you can do with that data. And I don't think it's the end game. I think it's just one of what I say is like, it's one of the consumption methods of the data. It's easy to understand. It's easy. There's a low bar to adoption because you can, hey, upload a PDF and you can chat with it. But I think the value we're going to see is that functionality of retrieval and repurposing that data just become part of an existing application. And so almost like, autocorrect becomes just something that it's just a little tiny piece of an application, of just any application, email. But behind the scenes, there's this iceberg of stuff that it's doing. And I kind of see this kind of moving that way, where with AI agents and more autonomous functionality, it'll still use all this data, the knowledge graph, the text that's been adjusted, but how it presents it to the end user will be maybe even totally hidden. Maybe it's just, you're just evaluating an email. Kind of like Grammarly or some of those apps, how they just kind of work in the background and tell you like the tone of your text or auto suggest something. I think we'll start to see it just become a feature. But with a lot of kind of dense platform underneath the hood that's driving it.
Yeah. I think this is something that a lot of my peers that I talk to are thinking about the same, right? This is going to become like a keystone technology, like the internet or anything else that we've used before. Is just utilized by everybody. And the benefits, of course, that we can all experience are going to be pretty tremendous.
Yeah, it's the end users don't talk SQL. For structured data. I think it's, at the end of the day, it ends up being a pattern that you can then derive functionality from. And I really see it heading that direction, but you have to get the data to be kind of, flowing per se, to even get to a point of inventing new layers on top of it, new user experiences and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So I know we veered a little bit away from Graphlit.
That's fine.
To make things a bit more tangible. You were mentioning how these knowledge graphs are, essential for creating like new AI tools, like other chatbots, for instance. Mm-hmm. How, what would be the efficiency gains or the development time reduction by using, say, Graphlit versus not using Graphlit or these knowledge graphs? Like, is it like a 5% difference? Is it a 50% difference? Could make that a little bit numerical for us?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it. If you look at just the data platform for data ingestion, preparation, getting to the point of retrieval, it could be 100 to 1. And because you could say that, the alternative is pulling together some open source projects, figuring out how to provision a vector database and cloud storage, and then developing, okay, well, how am I going to build this data platform and the queuing of the data, just all these different pieces. Like, demos are easy, but to put something like this into production at scale, if you have 100,000 documents, or even if you have a continuous stream of Slack messages, that part of it is not trivial. And so for us, we see the first level of, you just don't have to build this piece of your platform, this piece of your product yourself. Because often, at least over the last year, we've seen people almost having to build two products. They have to build their data pipeline, and then they have to build the product that they're really building. And we're trying to let people just use us as a service and say, look, here's an API, throw us data. We'll handle everything in the background. You get search, you get RAG, you get knowledge graphs, and you get an API to use. And that just compresses so much time. And what we found is, I mean, it could even be like a developer year. Multiple developer years of time that's saved, especially from a maintenance point of view, where now you get a new model coming out every week or two. Somebody has to go in there, make sure it's updated, make sure it's handling the right number of tokens, validate it. And we're doing that once for everybody in a SaaS offering, where that would have to be your developer times 100,000 companies doing that. So
fascinating. Yeah, it seems like with all, your tool, of course, but like ChatGPT and these other AI tools out there, it's really going to be a augmentation force for the labor market, for the labor force. It's going to be pretty interesting, I think, what we're going to see over the next 5 to 10 years.
So early. It really is. We were even a little too early, even when we started the company. And then I think everything kind of caught up in the last year has been really interesting, where a lot of the things we've been saying about you need tools for this, you need platforms for this, it's starting to click. And you're seeing now like VC market maps talk about it. And it's just now becoming more like in the common sort of domain, which is great. But I think we're not, it doesn't end here. I think this is still so early where, like to your question before of what are the benefits, we're not going to know the benefits probably for another 6-12 months of how is this, has this saved, has it increased profit, or has this been able to, have companies do more with less? That's where I see that just companies will become more effective.
Yeah.
And they can put their expenses in different buckets really, and not have to spend so much time developing a lot of this in-house.
And so you were talking about like developer years that could be saved on this. Do you also see, I've talked a lot about the impact on labor force, like employment, et cetera, which I think is, something that you've definitely thought of while working on this. Do you see there could be a reduced need for developers for a specific product or a specific app? You might only need 1 or 2 instead of, 3 or 4 or something like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's possible. But I think it also has a positive impact. I look at it a bit more in the glass half full case of it would allow for more smaller companies to be created. I really don't see it as a general population taking jobs away kind of thing. It's more of, can we automate some of these things that now a company could spin up that could be, $100 million company with 3 people in it, because now they're building. To me, it's no different than, nobody builds their own database. Very few deploy on their own infrastructure. And now it's like you got these cloud platforms, or just kind of another layer on that you can build even cooler stuff with just a few people. And then on the big company side, I think it also gives a way that, companies that maybe weren't classic, like you would think of them developing with AI, I think now they're getting exposed to so much more capability. And that's where this kind of democratization of AI, I'm really bullish on that. I think that's really where a lot of the value goes.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I see a lot of, maybe even less experienced developers might be able to build tools at a hastened rate. Rather than spending another 4 or 5 years working at a company to develop your skills. Well, now you have these tools. You've got Graphlit. You've got ChatGPT. You've got all these things that can help you facilitate your hobby or your dream or the product that you always wanted to build in a as you said, condensed time frame compared to the past.
Yeah, we all have a million other products or features that we want to build. So that's why I really don't think the whole people doomsaying of jobs are going to go away. There's a million features I'd love to have if I had 5 more developers.
Right.
If we can compress that and we only need 1 or 2 developers to do that with AI, great. And then that just helps our customers even further.
Yeah. I think we're going to experience something like the Model T versus horse and buggy, right? You have a transition. So yes, people lose jobs, but then there's a spurt of new opportunities that come up. And I guess the ultimate question is, well, how long is that transition is going to take? And then are there going to be people that are left behind versus the people that are using these technologies? How fast are they going to expand?
I mean, I'm old enough to remember. I mean, they used to talk about like 4GL, like fourth generation languages, and I mean, that became kind of the no code, low code tooling and things like that. But I mean, it's not like Bubble or Retool, which are great products. They don't take jobs away from a developer. The developers just start doing different things. But Bubble and Retool, those kind of things let developers who really wouldn't be classic developers, they can build very interesting applications. And so I think it actually opens up a big community there. So I think, I mean, it'll be really interesting. I mean, it's all good. Everybody adapts. I mean, that's the thing. I think once you've been around through a couple of these cycles, it's really just, and it'll adapt pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah. No, I think that's one thing that humans do well, right? We've expanded to every corner of the globe. We're very adaptable creatures, as long as we have the right kind of mindset, I guess. So you mentioned like construction and healthcare. We touched on a little bit. Of course, you're kind of agnostic as to the kind of vertical I think you mentioned. Are there any other kind of like interesting use cases that you guys have experienced so far that we didn't get to touch on before that might be interesting for people to hear about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some ones that, I mean, where we actually started, I had this kind of concept of, I mean, indexing everything in time and space. And so all the data, like, I mean, if it was a legal document, maybe there's an address in there that references where in the geospatial world, this piece of unstructured data matters. And then also it was written on a specific date. It maybe was edited on a specific date. So you get kind of a timeline view. And I think those axes of metadata that we can extract, I think we haven't barely even scraped the surface with that. And I think that was the tool we were starting to build where, I mean, you've taken a bunch of drone photos or photos on your iPhone, you have a bunch of documents that maybe are like inspection reports for these companies, because we were dealing with a lot of built world and like railways and things like that. And everything has kind of a time and space like benchmark to it. And that's where I think it gets super interesting, that if you could be like, okay, find me, I mean, we're talking about a specific plot of land. I mean, show me all the images of that were flown over, people that were inspecting that, documents that reference that, show me a timeline. And I think there's like a data visualization side to this that becomes super interesting. And I believe, I mean, that was actually the product we were starting to build that we built originally. But I think it's going to come full circle because now, I mean, we now have the power of LLMs and we have all this other power vision models. And now we're going to start seeing a rollover to more interesting user experience that really puts the hammer down for, I mean, the capabilities and the just beyond chat, I think is really what I'm really interested to see, sort of new user experience domains pop up out of this.
Yeah, that's super interesting. On a very micro scale here, one of my clients, it's a local landscaping company. Now they're new, they're growing certainly, but they need to get pictures of their before and after things, right? Very, very simple, very simple. But these guys are crazy busy. So they're snapping pictures from all these different job sites, but they know the times and dates that they've been on these places, but they can't necessarily remember which job site is which sometimes. Right. So I could imagine in some, future utopian situation for these guys, maybe using Graphlit or some other tools, if all of these images, if all of the data from the company is being fed into one of these models, you could just simply chat with your internal AI tool and say, hey, give me a before and after picture of all of these different job sites, rather than having to, they're literally spending hours and hours and hours going through thousands of pictures.
Catalog that whole, all of that. And that was literally the kind of product we were building originally, where just dump in all your data. Some of these companies had 20 years of data just sitting around. And we had built a tool to auto catalog a lot of this, where they could even draw out like a region around like a house or something like that. And be like, okay, that now will show you a timeline view of here's all my before and afters, here's all the PDFs of all the reports, of all the invoices and things like that. Now the user interface may just be, I mean, it could be a text message. It could be like, I go on, I literally text something in the back end saying, hey, I'm going, or it can even prompt you and say, I know you're going to this job site this morning. Here's what it looked like last week. Like, that's where I'm trying to get to of, that's not chat. That's not even a user interface per se, but it's AI driven by all this technology that we're talking about. And that's where I think it gets really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's really mind blowing when you think about it. Like, you know, my the example I always bring up is Her, the movie with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson. It really does seem, you know, you're one of the people that I've talked to about this. It really does seem like, well, you and many other people are building that kind of tool. Now, whether it takes 5 years, 10 years, or however long, right, to get to that level of sophistication. But the kind of benefits at a user level is just going to be phenomenal. You know, I'm thinking of, you know, my poor landscaping client having to deal with all this bullshit all the time rather than actually doing the work. And you can multiply that across an entire civilization. It's fascinating.
That's where I think it's a positive effect where, I mean, they would, get back, like we were talking to a guy at a port, and he was spending, like, he would be on the job site, like walking around, checking pipes, things like that, taking pictures of problems. I mean, maybe audio recordings, but he would only be at his desk for an hour a day. And that time compression of, I mean, if we could get them, like, by the time they get to their desk, all your data is auto-organized. Like, here's my path I walked, because we could track his GPS on his phone by the images and the stuff like that. I mean, just think of, like, you're essentially getting more work done per minute. And that's where I think that the value can then, I mean, that he can get more work done. He can go home on time. I mean, they were doing stuff like printing pictures and putting them on the wall to kind of prioritize things. And it was crazy because, I mean, I thought it was a great idea. It was just they couldn't absorb the workflow change at the time. This is like 3 years ago. And I think now with ChatGPT, people are a little more aware of it. And I think the bar is kind of raised, or lowered now to accept this. And I think we'll start to see more of those kind of apps come out over time.
Yeah, that's super interesting. One point that I have here that I'm thinking, so I'm taking a drone out and taking pictures for a couple of clients right now, right? Doing a little bit of digital marketing for them. But connected to that, I've also seen a lot of these companies out there that have autonomous drones that are able to take pictures or scan barcodes in, like, warehouses and things like that. What are your thoughts? And, you know, maybe this is a little bit too far ahead, but my mind goes there because I love this kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on, like, autonomous systems doing the role of, you know, like this client of yours that was at the harbor, you said? At the port, taking pictures, right? Whereas he could be at the desk, or he could be interacting with his own clients or his own colleagues a little bit more, and having some sort of autonomous system interact with the environment on your behalf and doing those kind of mundane, okay, well, take a picture here, take a picture there.
I mean, I think it's interesting is, I mean, a lot of companies have tried this. I mean, it's not so new. Like, we had talked to a company, one of the big paper providers, and they were looking to automate a lot of that with, I mean, even now the, the Boston Dynamics, the dog that looks like a dog that walks around. Spot. Yeah. I mean, that autonomous inspection is huge. I mean, the capabilities of doing those kind of things, but it becomes a cost effectiveness kind of thing. I mean, I don't think we've hit that turning point yet, but I think the capabilities, I think we have. Autonomous drones, like, they can go back, they can charge themselves, they can go out again. I mean, the mapping, the LiDAR capabilities, like, all these kind of things are kind of, I think they're pretty much there, but I think it becomes, okay, how do you introduce these technologies to the existing environments and make it cost effective? But
right.
I mean, those are issues that'll just solve themselves as technology gets cheaper over the years, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I think that my point here is connecting that to not necessarily replacing people, but more connected to what you're doing, right? If you have a system of autonomous tools out there bringing you data, then you need a program or a platform like yours in order to organize this properly.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and what we had started with was mostly, either user captured data that was either pictures they were taking or drones they were flying or things like that. But yeah, I mean, now you're getting that. Some of their companies doing security footage, kind of the similar kind of thing. They're processing all the security footage, doing object detection, that kind of stuff. I mean, it's an area I really am interested in. Like I'd worked for a drone analytics company that doing very similar stuff previous to this, and I think it's an exciting space for sure.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I mean, I can only imagine the kind of insights that you could gather from doing, whether it's automated inspections or even human-based inspections, but then you have all this unstructured data. You don't really know, like you can't really analyze it to such a deep extent with humans and then gain a lot of insight from it. You kind of need some of these autonomous tools or AI tools in order to gather some deeper insights that would then help your business.
Well, I think you have to kind of take it to a point of, I mean, you could call it structuring of data. Like, how do I identify the cracks in a bridge or things like that? And so it's like just staring at photos of bridges, like the same photo over 10 years, our eyes aren't going to catch it. But if you can run computer vision on it, identify highlights, and then compare that's that augmentation part you're talking about, where using the technology to like focus better, I think is where I see a lot of value.
Yeah, super interesting. Maybe one thing, and I don't think we've gone down this path yet, is how important is this to the future of actually developing AI tools, right? So we're talking about having this unstructured to structured data is useful for businesses and for the I guess some of the apps that are being built, but like the next GPT-5, which everybody's talking about all the time, like what's it going to be, like how many new things are going to be connected to it. But one of the things that I've talked about on the podcast before is, well, the data that OpenAI needs in order to train the next model on. I would assume something like Graphlit would be pretty important to take all this unstructured data, structure it, and then either package it, anonymize it, or whatever for OpenAI, or not just OpenAI, but any of these larger AI companies to use.
It's an interesting question because the way I've seen it today, there's kind of a bottom-up approach from the data science, machine learning community for model training, and there's a lot of tools out there for unstructured data specific to that world of model training. We're kind of coming at it from the top down, where we're saying, look, we're trying to democratize this for application developers. So we're going to use off-the-shelf models like OpenAI, Anthropic. So we don't actually touch that world at all today. And there's great companies out there, I mean, that are doing massive amounts of data, but they're really just targeting model training new models or evaluating new models at the end of the day. And so it's like, for us, we kind of just go to the store and get them like they're already there.
Right.
And that's it intentionally. I mean, really. And so it was a decision to say, look, we're trying to help the end developers to use these applications to leverage all the great work that Anthropic and OpenAI and Meta has done. But we're pulling together their data on a pre-trained model. And how do you integrate their unstructured data with that model rather than training the model in the first place? So there are really two camps. I mean, there's two they don't really overlap that much. I mean, and so we're just kind of building on the shoulders of the big foundation model providers rather than, I mean, there is something, we are looking at fine tuning where, I mean, that might be an area that we go into of, we have the data, we can fine tune a model like GPT-4. Or I mean, I was just looking at GPT-4o mini now, but like I don't see us ever getting into like the model training world on a foundation model.
Okay, interesting. So we kind of skipped outside of the more technical things at the beginning to kind of make it a little bit more tangible. Are there any other points that you think would be relevant or necessary to understand that maybe I glossed over at the beginning?
I mean, I think really, I mean, we did a good coverage of unstructured data, knowledge graphs. I think the big takeaway I would just say is there's not one answer. I mean, there's been papers, there's different vendors that kind of have their own flavor of this. Microsoft had a paper on GraphRag recently that, I mean, actually was I mean, somewhat different than our approach. And we had already been working on our approach previously, but it's got a lot of uptake just because they're Microsoft. But I think it almost can be confusing for people because they're thinking, oh, GraphRag, it's a product. I can go buy it off the shelf, and there's only one version of it. And what we're saying is, just like RAG, there's 100 different flavors of RAG out there from different, open source projects and vendors. GraphRag is the same. And so I think as we keep moving forward, these are patterns we can all learn from, and there's going to be different flavors of it. And some are going to have better, uses for some situations and some for others. So, like the Microsoft one is very summarization focused, grouping things, clustering things, and then summarizing them and using that as part of RAG, which actually isn't our approach at all. And so it's, but it still falls under the GraphRag heading in a lot of ways.
Okay. Okay. So let's say I'm a business and I'm listening to this podcast. I'm thinking, oh, this is interesting. Maybe I've got a lot of unstructured data that I need to get structured, and maybe I can find some insights from it. Apart from getting in touch with you guys, how should they start to think about this journey that they might take into this new wondrous field?
I think just getting access to the data, understanding the volume of data you have, understanding the velocity of the data. Is it just you just have an S3 bucket with 100,000 files and there's nothing being added to it? Or is it a Slack channel or email where it's continually streaming? I think understanding that context of your data is super important, and the different types of the data and the volume of the data. And it's actually, it's pretty easy to, even with picking an open source project like LangChain or LlamaIndex or one of these, there's sample code, there's demo apps. You could build something very quickly. But I think what you need to understand, what companies need to understand is, putting that into production alongside, say, like a Snowflake or a SQL database or something like that, you have to level up, and you have to think about, observability of the data. How do you productionalize the data, the backup of that data, all those kind of things. There's just more to the table than just a Python notebook that you can show the capabilities. And so I think understanding your data is first. Understanding how you're going to productionalize it is probably second, after you've kind of done maybe a bit of a demo. And then really picking, do you really need to build this yourself? Or can you use a platform like ours or other vendor where you focus on the data, you give us the data, and then you focus on how do I want to consume it? I want to search it, chat with it, summarize it, etc.
Okay, interesting. Are there any other things that we should be talking about? We have gone through most of the questions that I had set up for you. And I wanted to talk about the future of unstructured data and AI, but we've already touched on that. So I kind of give the last open-ended question to you, Kirk.
No, it was a great conversation. I think, the one thing that it really interests me is the costs of all. And that's, I think, what we're seeing. Really on a week-by-week basis, the cost structure changes. And that is actually driving innovation and uptake on this technology almost more than how easy it is to integrate. With GPT-4o Mini that just came out this week, that drove the cost to the ground. It's close to Claude Haiku from Anthropic, but the capabilities are, seem noticeably better. And I think that opens up a lot more capabilities, especially in the knowledge graph domain, because entity extraction is a very token intensive. You basically have to the LLM has to look at every word in the document and read everything at that time to create it. And so you're essentially, your costs are the order of how many words or tokens are in your text.
Right.
And for companies that have 200-page documents and 100,000 of them or 10,000 of them, it's not trivial. And so that's what I was actually this morning working on a benchmark of 5 different models that are out there currently and how well they do for knowledge graph extraction. And the cost differential is, it was probably 10 or maybe even the 25x between the top and the bottom, from GPT-4 Turbo down to Haiku or Mini. But then comparing the quality, how well do they actually do on these tasks? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a huge part of being in production with these models, is understanding how do you evaluate them? Like, are they even giving me the data back that I want? And I mean, we've got companies that almost, quote, accidentally spent like $1,000 in a day on token usage just because they're like, well, I'm just going to dump a bunch of stuff in here, not really thinking about what it's doing under the hood. And it's not hard to do. Like to really, I mean, spend a ton of money with these models. And at the end of the day, it's not even our costs per se. It's directly just paying OpenAI for, I mean, or one of these guys for that stuff.
Sure. Yeah, it'll be to this point with costs. I mean, technology is always getting cheaper as it improves over time. So it'll be very interesting to see 6 months from now, a year from now, how the costs go down and how this opens up the opportunity for companies to start doing this stuff a little bit more.
I think that the interesting part is that because these changes happen so fast, which I don't think has happened in any other domain, even in mobile or cloud, that companies maybe are trying to be like, okay, when do I get off the sidelines? And like, is it just, if I wait a month, is it better? We try and abstract from that. Like our data flow, how you use our platform, doesn't matter what model you use. And it's really, that's what we're trying to separate those two things where, okay, the downstream stuff just ends up getting cheaper, faster, or better, but the upstream doesn't change. And I think that'll be interesting to see. I mean, how that holds up over time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, interested to follow up on with you maybe in 6 months or something, Kirk.
Yeah.
To see how things have changed. I'll have your website and your LinkedIn up on the show notes of the podcast. Are there any other places that you like people to reach out or follow what you guys are up to?
Yeah, Twitter as well. So Graphlit and just Kirk Marple on Twitter. Post some stuff there. We're starting to post more on YouTube, and all our sample apps are up on GitHub right now. And we're free to get started with.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, Kirk. Interesting conversation. Certainly opened up my mind to a little bit of a world that I'm not super familiar with. So thanks for your time and insights.
Yeah,
it was fun. Yeah. Well, best of luck with Graphlit.
Thank you so much. Appreciate being here.
Cheers.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard of living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.